Whether or not you've actually played scales before, I find that many students are very confused by scales and what they're all about. So we are going to help you demystify scales, help you really understand what they are, how you can work them out for yourself so that hopefully you never again have to think about memorizing your scales, but rather that you can really just understand them. We're going to start off by learning the F major scale today. And to do that, I'm going to first explain to you what scales are, specifically what major scales are. Now, before we get into our scales, there is a concept that you first need to understand. The concept of whole tones and half tones, also sometimes called whole steps and half steps, or whole tones and semitones. But it's this idea that the smallest musical units that we usually use, at least in kind of Western musical traditions, are called half steps. In other words, the smallest distance between two notes are these little half steps. And two half steps make up one whole step. So for example, if I go from A to B, that is a whole step because there is a little half step hidden between, which is the B flat, A to B flat. Now that is a half step, or B flat to B, also a half step. So again, just to show that here, so we've got A to B, there is your whole step. So we'll call it a whole step like that. And then we've got the B flat in between, and there is your half step and another half step. And why this is so important is because scales are basically just patterns of whole steps and half steps. They're like a group of notes that kind of belong together, that go well together, that sound pretty good together. We're going to continue this analogy throughout our videos of the scales kind of being like a family. So if we can imagine the major scale is the main family unit, all the notes in that scale belong together, and like most families, they have a very particular pattern. So let's take a look at the very particular pattern of the major scale. So bear with me. The major scale consists of 8 notes, 7 different notes, and then you have the first and the last note of the scale repeated. I've numbered them, and we'll explain why we've done that in a moment, but really the number is just the position of those notes in the scale. Again, much like a family has, father and mother and kids, which have different positions within the family, so do the numbers in a scale. In fact, this is what makes a scale so different from a key signature. We'll get to those as well. But a scale is really the ordered notes. So the notes are going in sequence up and down. Whereas a key signature is just a collection of notes that belong together that are the notes of that scale, but they don't have to be in order. Okay, so for example, C major, I can use any notes of the scale and I'm in C major, but the C major scale has to follow that specific order of notes. In fact, here we go. You'll see C major. We've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Those are the notes of C major. So if I had to define a scale, I'd probably say something like it is a collection of notes in sequential order that follow a very specific pattern. So where you see a big space between notes, that is a whole step. Where you see 2 boxes next to each other, that is a half step. So you'll see in the major scale, we've got 1, 2. So between notes 1 and 2, there's a whole step. Between 2 and 3, there's a whole step. Between 3 and 4, there's only a half step. Then between 4 and 5, there's a whole step. Between 5 and 6, there's a whole step. Between 6 and 7, there's a whole step. And then between 7 and 8, there is yet again a half step. Now here's the thing. All major scales have the exact same pattern. That's simple. They really have the exact same pattern. But of course, the starting note changes. And that's because we name a scale based on whatever note it starts on. So for example, F major starts on F. C major starts on C. B flat major starts on B flat. So whatever your starting note of your scale is, that is the name of your scale, at least with the majors and the minors. But this is where the magic starts, because if we have the same pattern of notes, but each time that scale just starts on a different note, we can expect the follow-up notes to be different as well. And as it turns out, they actually follow a very, very organized, clear, and methodical system. But just watch how this happens. So I'm going to just select my nice pattern pattern here. So this is my scale, my major scale. Now in this case, I was starting on C. So we had the notes for C major. If I though changed it and now I want to go to, let's play F major, you'll see now my notes will be F, G, A, B flat. Earlier with C major, it was B natural, C, D, E, and F, like that. Same pattern, but slightly different notes. Likewise, if we drag it around again, we're going to pull it. Maybe we want to try and play C sharp, or usually we think D flat major. Some of you might think, oh my goodness, that's way above my pay grade. But bear with me for just a moment here. So we've got D flat. Let's do this in flats. It's much easier to do. When you have a scale in flats, all the notes will be in flat. If you have a scale in sharps, all the notes will be in sharp. So we have D flat, E flat, F, G flat, A flat, B flat, C, D flat, just like that. So depending on where that scale starts, the pattern will always stay the same. The ratio of whole steps and half steps always stays the same. Think of like a stencil moving over a color, sort of like a gradient color block. Each time, the colors underneath will shift and change, but the stencil itself, whatever stencil you have, will be the exact same pattern. Same thing for major scales. And let me play a few for you, and you can hopefully hear they sound exactly the same. So we had C major, F major, D flat major. So they start on different notes, yes, and they have a slightly different characteristic as a result, but essentially they sound the same. Now we have different types of scales. We have minor scales. They have their own particular type of pattern, and they're actually related to majors, but we'll get to that. We have arpeggios. They also have a very particular type of pattern. We have chromatic scales and a whole bunch of other scales that all have their own special pattern. But the crucial thing that ties those types of scales together is the pattern. So majors all have the same pattern. Minors all have the same pattern. Now, one other little thing that might have got some of you confused, and I'm going to just explain that, is why are D flat and C sharp, what? They're the same note? Yes, they are. We have a concept in music called inharmonic equivalence. Very fancy word. Very, very fancy word, which basically, much like in language, where, for example, I could use the word root to mean a few different things. It could be a root, as in a root of a tree, or I know in the US you say route, but in the British English we say route as well for the route that you're taking and you're traveling on. We have many words like this that mean the same thing, that either are spelt the same or spelt slightly differently, as in this case, but actually they're the exact same thing. And that's the reality with the notes. So yes, D flat and C sharp are the same notes. They're so-called enharmonic equivalence. Don't worry about that too much right now, because as we go, this is going to become clearer and clearer. But for now, it's important to just know that there are these notes that have two different ways of writing them, but they're actually the exact same note, certainly on the flute. Okay, before we get into actually playing our first scale, there is one more order of business that can be quite confusing. Okay, I've moved my scale back to this original position, and you'll see that for the most part we have C, and then the whole tone is to the D, but between there's either a sharp or a flat, then D to E, whole tone, but there's an E flat or a D sharp. Or here at the beginning, A to B is the whole tone, but between there is actually this B flat or A sharp. And the question that automatically comes up is, but why is there no sharp or flat between E and F and B and C? And my friends, I wish I had a good reason here for you. But the reason we have a slightly odd musical structure like this is because of the piano, the keyboard. And excuse my very bad drawing here, but the keyboard, we typically have the following. We have black and white notes, which I'm going to just draw for you like this. So you have black notes like this, and you have white notes. And usually, if you go from one white note to the next, it's a whole tone. And if you go from a white note to a black note, it's a half tone, like that. However, if you just had a uniform keyboard with all just black, white, black, white, black, white, black, white notes, keyboardists or pianists would have a very difficult time knowing where they are on the keyboard. So to help them get better orientation, this type of a keyboard was invented, where you have groups of 2, then you have a gap with no black note, and then you have a group of 3 like this. So if you go look at any piano or keyboard, you will see this delightful pattern. Wonderful, isn't it? And as a result, we have these moments. I can draw them in for you here. Again, excuse my terrible keyboard drawings here. Well, we have these moments on keyboards where we have B, C, no black note in between, and we have E, F, no black note in between. So that is why we have this slightly lopsided asymmetrical musical structure, and to be honest, it has caused the most amount of problems you can imagine. So thank you, pianists, for this. In terms of what you need to know, you just need to realize that there is a half step between E and F and a half step between B and C. It's one of those things that you just have to know that you know that you know that you know that you know. And this is not going to be even that important for your major scale, but it's going to be super important for your chromatic scale. So hold up, we'll get there. All right, with that said, let's go ahead and play our F major scale, our very first scale. So we're going to find our scale here. So we're going to select our major blocks here. And we're going to drag it. We said F major, so it starts on F. There it is. And there are the notes of F major. So we have F, G, A, B flat, C, I've gotten a little bit skewed, but D, E, and then F. Now, we have put the sheet music there for you. You can absolutely go ahead and learn your scales with the sheet music first. However, it is so much better if you just understand how the scale works, you understand how the note patterns work, and that you just play them without the sheet music from the very, very, very beginning. This is such a challenging thing as a teacher because on the one hand, I know it's really helpful to have them written out. On the other hand, I really want you to rather just understand the pattern and play the pattern. You don't even have to know where the whole tones and the half tones are yet, but just understand the basic concept of the scale, understand what flats and sharps you have in, and then just play the notes. And to help you do this, one of my favorite approaches is just to go through and do the fingers for each scale. So we don't just go ahead and play straight away. We actually do the fingers carefully and slowly. So we have F, then G, A, B flat. I personally like to use the B flat key at the back here, this little bobbly key, rather than using the one-on-one fingering, the long B flat. We do need this fingering as well, but this is my standard B flat fingering. I know many of you have not been taught this, but generally I think it is a much more solid idea to get used to the standard fingering. That's the thumb fingering, B flat, and this one we use and practice as an additional tool for the times when we need it, and there will be times when we absolutely will need it. Okay, so again, let's go. F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F, and then coming down again, E, D, C, B flat, A, G, F. If that was too fast and too challenging, I'm going to encourage you to just sit and look at this screen. Just press pause and watch. Look at the screen. Just follow through those notes and just get it. It's really just one note after the next. It's a lovely German word for scales, and that is Tonleiter, which literally means a tone ladder, where you're just kind of climbing up the ladder one tone at a time and then coming down the ladder again, one tone at a time. That's it. So again, let's do it together. F, G, A, B flat, C, D, E, F, and then coming down, E, D, C, B flat, A, G, F. Little side quest here just for a moment. It can actually be really beneficial for you to actually practice saying the musical alphabet backwards. So you say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that's forward, and then we say it backwards, which is G, F, E, D, C, B, A. I remember having to practice this, and it's quite a nice little brain challenge, but to actually just practice and get into the habit of doing that, because it can be quite tricky to come down again because you're just not used to saying that alphabet backwards. Okay, so now that you've done the fingers, hopefully those are feeling comfortable, we are finally ready to play the scale. We're going to slow this down quite nicely. Think about really getting a nice balanced body. We're going to find our feet on the ground. We're going to use a nice calm, full breath. This is not about speed. This is about getting this information into your brain and practicing beautiful, good, open tone while we're at it. So let's go for it. Find your feet. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. If you needed to breathe before then, that's totally fine. But otherwise, if you can, breathe at the top and let's come down. We're going to repeat the F. 3 and. We're not so worried about the breathing right now. We're worried about getting the notes. I'm going to try it one more time with me. Let's give it a go. 2, 3, 4. So giving you an example there of where you could breathe every couple of notes if you need to. There it is, your first major scale done and dusted. Hopefully you understand these major scales a little bit better. Now, if you would like to do more of this, you would like to actually do some more step-by-step flute learning just like this, you might be interested in our learning program. We have got quite literally hundreds of videos for you to work through, some that are short and sweet, well, shortish and sweetish like this, some that are really quite long and in-depth where we teach you through pieces and studies and teach you new techniques and long tones and a whole lot more. So if you want to go and check that out, I encourage you, we've got a link drop down below, go and have some fun and watch through that. Otherwise, you might be interested in going to this video next and learning how to play your first arpeggio. Happy practicing, and I'll see you there.